Be me, Damien. Living a pretty good life, all things considered. Got a decent job in a field I don't hate, a small house in a quiet suburb, and a wife, Piper. We'd been married for a few years, and things were solid, or so I thought. The first couple of years were exactly what you'd hope for. We were a team. Weekends were for projects around the house, hiking trips, or just being lazy on the couch together, watching movies. I'd make her coffee every morning. She'd make my favorite dinner when I had a rough day at work. It was the little things, you know? The stuff that makes you feel like you're truly connected to someone. There was affection. There was laughter. Our home felt warm. Then something started to shift. It wasn't sudden, more like a slow, creeping change in the atmosphere. Piper started spending a lot of time with a new group of friends she met through some online community, especially this one friend who seemed to have a very strong influence on her. Suddenly, our conversations started to feel different. New words and phrases began to pepper her vocabulary, things like emotional labor, unspoken expectations, and patriarchal constructs. At first, I didn't think much of it. People pick up new interests, new ways of talking. I tried to be supportive. I'd listen when she talked about the articles she was reading or the discussions she was having. A lot of it seemed to revolve around the idea of men being unconsciously demanding, how society trains men to expect constant comfort and attention from women without giving back in the same way. I remember thinking, do I do that? I started being extra conscious of everything, made sure I was doing more than my fair share of chores, always asked how her day was before talking about mine. I figured if this was important to her, I should make the effort to show I was listening. But it seemed like the more I tried, the more she found things to critique. My attempts to be affectionate started getting analyzed. A hug from behind while she was doing dishes was no longer just a hug. It was an interruption of her focus, a demand for her attention when she was busy. Me putting my arm around her on the couch was an assumption of access to her personal space. Each time, it was explained to me in this calm, almost clinical tone, as if she were teaching a student. It was confusing, and honestly, it started to sting. The warmth in our house was slowly being replaced by a set of unspoken rules I could never seem to learn fast enough. The breaking point came one evening. We were just sitting and talking, and she laid it all out. She told me she'd been doing a lot of thinking about her personal agency and bodily autonomy within our marriage. She explained that the spontaneous nature of physical intimacy in most relationships is actually a low-key form of masculine pressure, that the woman is always expected to be ready and available for the man's desires. I just sat there, trying to process this. I thought about all the times she had initiated things, all the times we were clearly both into it. It didn't feel one-sided to me, but she was convinced. She had a solution, a way to make our intimate life more equitable and respectful of her boundaries. She wanted to schedule it. She pulled out her phone and showed me her calendar app. Her idea was that we would designate specific days and times for intimacy, mutually agreed upon in advance. That way she would never feel pressured or surprised. She would be able to mentally prepare, and it would be something she was actively choosing, not just reacting to. She presented it like a genius life hack for modern relationships. I was floored. I told her that it felt cold, clinical, that it took all the romance and spontaneity out of it. That part of the magic is that it happens because you both feel a spark in the moment. She had a counter-argument for everything. She said that spontaneity was a myth that benefited men, and that intentionality was far more respectful. She said this would be good for us. It would remove any guesswork or awkwardness. I could see there was no arguing with her. She had her mind made up. This wasn't a discussion. It was a policy announcement. Feeling cornered and not wanting to be the unenlightened husband she was describing, I reluctantly agreed to try it. The next morning, I got a calendar notification. It was an invitation from Piper. Intimacy slot. Scheduled for Thursday evening. My heart sank. It looked like a meeting request for work. The first few weeks of the new system were surreal. Life in our home became a series of landmines. Any touch, any affectionate gesture outside of the scheduled time was immediately shut down. I'd come home from work and try to give her a proper kiss, and she'd turn her cheek to me. "Not now, Damien. You know the schedule." We'd be laughing at a joke, and I'd reach out to touch her arm, and she'd pull back slightly. It was like an invisible electric fence was installed around her. The message was clear. My affection was only welcome during business hours, and the scheduled nights themselves, they were awful. There was this immense pressure hanging in the air. It felt performative, like we were both acting out a scene from a script. There was no build-up, no natural passion. It was just Thursday, time to clock in. All the joy was gone. It felt like a chore, another item to check off the weekly to-do list. I started to feel a deep sense of rejection. It wasn't just about the physical side of things. It was the complete dismissal of my desire to feel connected to her in small, everyday ways. She was essentially saying that my natural impulse to show my wife affection was a problem that needed to be managed and contained. Meanwhile, she seemed perfectly happy with the new arrangement. She'd talk to her friend on the phone, and I'd overhear her saying how empowered she felt, how she had decolonized her relationship and taken back control. She was completely oblivious to the fact that she was slowly and methodically pushing her husband away. She saw it as a victory for her independence. I saw it as the slow death of our marriage. I tried to talk to her about it again a month or so into the experiment. I explained how distant I felt, how the lack of simple, everyday affection was making me feel more like her roommate than her husband. She listened patiently, then explained to me that my feelings were a result of societal conditioning, that I had been taught to view female affection as something I was entitled to, and that my discomfort was just my male privilege being challenged. She suggested I read some articles to educate myself. That was the moment I realized I couldn't win. My genuine feelings were being dismissed as a symptom of a character flaw. There was no room for my perspective. Her ideology had all the answers, so I stopped trying. I stopped trying to hug her. I stopped trying to kiss her. I stopped trying to talk about it. I just existed. I built a wall around myself because it hurt too much to keep bumping into hers. Our house became quiet. The friendly banter disappeared. The comfortable silence was replaced by a tense, heavy one. We were two people living separate lives in the same building. I poured all my energy into other things. Work became my focus. I started taking on extra projects, staying late. My boss was thrilled. I started working out a lot. I'd go to the gym after my long hours at the office and just exhaust myself. It was better than going home to that cold, quiet house. The physical exertion was a release for all the frustration and loneliness that was building up inside me. Sometime later, I reconnected with my best friend Jay. We hadn't seen much of each other since Piper's new philosophy took over our lives. Social events had become complicated. We met up for a beer one night. He could tell something was wrong right away. I was quieter, more reserved. I'd lost some weight, but looked tired. He asked what was going on, and for the first time in months, I let it all out. I told him everything. The schedule, the calendar invites, the lectures on patriarchy, the constant feeling of being treated like a problem to be managed. I expected him to be shocked, maybe even laugh at the absurdity of it. But he just listened. When I was done, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked me straight in the eye. He told me that what Piper was doing wasn't about empowerment. It was about control. He said she'd taken the most human part of a relationship and turned it into power play. He said, "She doesn't see you as a husband, man. She sees you as a prop in her personal liberation story." He pointed out that a partnership is about meeting in the middle, not one person dictating terms like a CEO. He asked me a simple question: "Are you happy?" And for the first time, I answered honestly, to myself and to him, "No, I'm miserable." He didn't offer any easy solutions. He just said I deserved to be in a relationship where I felt wanted, not just tolerated on a schedule. The drive home that night was different. Jay's words echoed in my head. It's about control. He was right. This wasn't about her boundaries. It was about her having absolute power over our connection. She had all the leverage, and I was just supposed to gratefully accept whatever scraps of affection she doled out on her terms. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a while, looking at the house. The lights were on, but it didn't look like a home. It looked like a building, and as I sat there, something inside me just broke. It wasn't a loud, dramatic shatter. It was a quiet, clean snap. The part of me that was still hoping, still trying, still hurting, it just went silent. A strange sense of calm washed over me. It was the calm of giving up, the peace that comes from accepting a reality you've been fighting against. I had been trying to play a game where the rules were constantly changing and designed for me to lose, so I decided to stop playing. I walked into the house. Piper was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and said something like, "You're home late." There was no warmth in it, just a statement of fact. I just nodded, said I was tired, and went to the spare bedroom. We had a spare room that was mostly used for storage. I started sleeping there that night. I didn't make a big announcement. I just did it. The next day, she asked why I hadn't slept in our bed. I gave a simple, non-confrontational answer. "I've been having trouble sleeping. Figured I wouldn't disturb you." It was a lie, but it was easier than the truth. She accepted it without much thought. Her world was so focused on her own feelings and needs that mine were barely a blip on the radar. A new routine began. I'd wake up early, go to the gym, go to work, come home, make myself a simple dinner, and then retreat to the garage. I had an old motorcycle project I'd abandoned years ago, a classic bike that needed a full restoration. I pulled the tarp off it and got to work. The garage became my sanctuary. The smell of grease and metal, the focus required to rebuild an engine, the satisfaction of seeing something broken slowly come back to life. It was therapy. Hours would just melt away. I was either at work, at the gym, or in the garage. Piper and I became ghosts to each other. We'd pass in the hallway with a quiet nod. We communicated through sticky notes on the fridge. "Need milk." "Garbage day tomorrow." The intimacy schedule was still on the calendar, I assume. I had deleted the app from my phone. I didn't care what day it was. My life was now about my job, my health, and my project. I was building something for myself, rebuilding myself in a way. I started feeling better. The constant ache of rejection began to fade. It was replaced by the soreness of a good workout, the satisfaction of a productive day at work, the pride of seeing the motorcycle slowly take shape. I wasn't happy, not in the way I used to be, but I wasn't miserable anymore. I was numb, and numb was a huge improvement. Piper didn't seem to notice the change in me for a while, or if she did, she didn't care. She was probably glad to have the house to herself, free from my patriarchal presence. She had her friends, her online communities, her theories. She was busy being empowered. I think, in her mind, everything was working perfectly. She had successfully trained her husband. He was quiet, didn't bother her, and was available for his designated function on Thursday nights. She had no idea that the man she thought she had under complete control no longer existed. She was about to try and use a key on a lock that had been changed. The first scheduled night that I missed, I was in the garage. I was deep into rebuilding the carburetor. My hands were covered in grease, and I had music playing on an old radio. I was completely in the zone. The garage door to the house opened, and Piper was standing there. She was dressed differently, not her usual sweatpants and t-shirt. She had made an effort. She just stood there for a second, looking a little confused, as if she'd walked into the wrong room. "It's almost 9, she said. I glanced at the clock on the wall. Yeah, time flies. I turned back to the carburetor. She didn't move. "It's Thursday," she said, a little more pointedly this time. I didn't even look up. "Okay, and?" The silence that followed was heavy. I could feel her staring at me, trying to understand what was happening. This was not part of the program. I was supposed to be waiting, ready for my scheduled duty. She tried a different tactic. "Well, I'm heading to bed now," she said, in a tone that was clearly meant to be an invitation. I finally put my tool down and wiped my hands on a rag. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no desire. Just nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. "All right," I said. "Have a good night." And I turned back to my engine. I heard her stand there for another 10 seconds, and then the door to the house clicked shut. I kept working for another hour before cleaning up and heading to the spare room. I fell asleep instantly. The next day, she was acting strange. She was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet, a watchful, uncertain quiet. She kept looking at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I just went about my day. Gym, work, garage. The following week, the same thing happened. Thursday rolled around. This time, she came into the garage earlier. She tried to be playful. She leaned against my workbench and started asking questions about the motorcycle. It was painfully obvious that she wasn't interested. It was a means to an end. I gave her short, polite answers. Finally, she got to the point. "Are you coming inside soon?" she asked. "It's our night." I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. "I'm not really feeling it," I said, as calmly and neutrally as I could. "You're not feeling it?" she repeated, as if I'd just started speaking a foreign language. "But it's on the schedule." "Yeah, I know, but the schedule doesn't work for me anymore." Her face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, then irritation, then a flicker of something else. Was it panic? "What do you mean it doesn't work for you? We agreed on it. It's about respecting my boundaries." That was it. That was the line that did it. "No, Piper," I said, my voice still quiet but hard as steel. "This was never about respect. This was about you calling all the shots. A relationship is supposed to be a partnership. You turned it into dictatorship, and I'm done." I picked up my wrench and went back to work. It was the most I'd said to her in weeks. She was speechless. She just stood there, completely stunned, then turned and walked out. The power dynamic in our house had just shifted, and she was on the wrong side of it. And she had absolutely no idea what to do next. The days that followed were thick with a new kind of tension. It wasn't the cold, empty silence from before. This was a charged silence. Piper was now constantly trying to engage with me, and I was constantly, politely, deflecting. Her entire strategy had been built on the assumption of my desire. She had treated my affection like a faucet she could turn on and off at her convenience. Now she had discovered that someone had shut off the water at the main, and she didn't have the key. Her first approach was anger, disguised as concern. She confronted me in the kitchen one morning while I was making my coffee. She wanted to know what my problem was. Why was I being so childish and passive-aggressive? She said if I was upset about something, I should use my words like an adult. This was coming from the woman who had replaced communication with a calendar. The irony was staggering. I just looked at her, sipping my coffee. I told her I wasn't being passive-aggressive. I was just busy. I said I was focusing on my work and my own projects. This wasn't the answer she wanted. She wanted a fight. She wanted an emotional reaction. An emotional reaction would mean I still cared. It would give her something to work with, to analyze, to control. I gave her nothing. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, said I was going to be late for the gym, and walked out. Her frustration was a visible aura around her. Her next tactic was to try and take back the initiative, to prove that the spontaneity she had outlawed was still hers to command. A few nights later, I came home from work, and the house smelled incredible. She had cooked a huge, elaborate meal, my favorite dish, one she hadn't made in over a year. The table was set with the good plates. There were candles. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen since our anniversary. A few months ago, this would have been a dream come true. Now, it just felt like a carefully planned ambush. I was polite. I told her it smelled great. I sat down and ate. She tried to steer the conversation toward us, reminiscing about old times, about the beginning of our relationship. I could see what she was doing. She was trying to remind me of the man I used to be, the man who was desperate for her affection. I didn't play along. I kept the conversation neutral. Work, the weather. A funny thing Jay had said. I ate the meal, complimented her cooking, and then thanked her for dinner. As I stood up to clear my plate, she put her hand on my arm. "Don't go yet," she said softly. I looked down at her hand. It was the first time she had initiated touch in what felt like a lifetime, and I felt absolutely nothing. The spark was gone. The wires had been cut. I gently removed her hand. "I appreciate the dinner, Piper. It was very nice, but I've got a lot to do in the garage tonight." The look on her face was a mixture of shock and genuine hurt. This was a full-blown romantic gesture, by any normal standard, and I had just treated it like a business dinner. I had taken her ultimate move and rendered it powerless. As I walked away, I heard her let out a small, frustrated sigh. The rejection was now flowing in the opposite direction, and she didn't like it one bit. She was feeling the exact same sting I had felt every single day for months. The situation continued to devolve. She started complaining to her friend. I'd overhear parts of her phone calls. She'd be in the other room, her voice a low, angry murmur. I'd catch phrases. "He's completely shut down. It's like living with a robot." This is what male toxicity looks like. When they don't get what they want, they resort to the silent treatment. Her friend was obviously feeding the narrative, reinforcing her belief that she was the victim, that my withdrawal was a form of punishment, a manipulative tactic. They couldn't conceive of the idea that my feelings had simply evaporated. In their worldview, the male desire for female attention was a constant, like gravity. It couldn't just disappear. Therefore, it must be a trick, a strategy. They were trying to analyze a problem without ever considering they were the cause of it. Her final, desperate move was vulnerability. One evening, I was in the garage, methodically cleaning a piece of the engine. The door opened, and she came in. Her eyes were red. She had been crying. She didn't speak for a while, just watched me work. Then, her voice cracking, she asked me what she had done that was so wrong. She said she was just trying to create a relationship based on mutual respect and consent. She asked if I had found someone else. Was that it? She started to cry in earnest now, telling me she missed me, that she missed us. This was the big one, the emotional trump card. The old me would have crumbled. The old me would have rushed to comfort her, to reassure her, to take all the blame just to make the tears stop. But the old me was gone. He had died of 1,000 tiny cuts. I put down my tools and turned to face her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show any anger. I just spoke the simple, plain truth. You didn't do one thing wrong, Piper. You did everything wrong. You took something that was supposed to be warm and alive, and you turned it into a cold, sterile transaction. You lectured me about respect while showing me none. You talked about my feelings being a product of conditioning, completely dismissing that they were real. You didn't want a partner. You wanted an accessory that performed on command. You wanted all the power, and you got it. This, I said, gesturing to the space between us, is the result of that. The feelings I had for you, they didn't just go into hiding. They're gone. You starved them to death. There's no one else. There's just nothing left. I let the words hang in the air. She stared at me, her tears stopping as the weight of what I was saying finally hit her. This wasn't a mood swing. This wasn't a punishment. This was an ending. She just whispered, "No." Then she turned and fled back into the house. The next day, she came to me with an ultimatum. We had to go to marriage counseling. She said she had found a therapist and had already booked an appointment for us. She framed it as our last chance to fix this. In her eyes, this was my problem, my coldness, my distance. I agreed immediately. She seemed surprised by how quickly I said yes. She probably thought I would resist, that she would have to drag me there. But I saw the counseling session for what it was, a neutral venue. It was a place where I could state my case one last time in front of a third-party witness and finally close this chapter. We drove to the therapist's office in complete silence. The office was what you'd expect. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, abstract art on the walls. The therapist was a woman in her 50s. She had a calm, professional demeanor. She started by asking why we were there. Piper went first. She launched into a long, well-rehearsed speech. She painted a picture of herself as a progressive, thoughtful wife who had simply tried to establish healthy boundaries in her marriage. She talked about emotional labor, consent, and creating a safe space for herself. She explained that she had proposed a system to make their intimate life more intentional and less subject to male-centric spontaneity. Then, she said, her husband had done a complete 180. He had become cold, distant, and resentful. He had moved into the spare room. He was stonewalling her. She suggested he was punishing her for asserting her independence. She finished by saying she loved her husband and wanted to find a way to get him to open up again and work through his obvious anger issues. It was a masterful performance. She was the reasonable, loving wife, and I was the broken, angry husband who needed to be fixed. The therapist listened patiently, nodding occasionally. When Piper was finished, the therapist turned to me. "Damien," she said, "what's your perspective on this?" I took a deep breath, and then I told my story. I didn't use any of Piper's jargon. I didn't talk about theories. I talked about how it felt. I described the coffee in the morning, the spontaneous hugs, the feeling of warmth that used to fill our house. I described the day she came to me with a schedule, the calendar invites that felt like work meetings. I explained what it feels like to have your natural, loving impulses be diagnosed as a symptom of a societal problem. I told her how every no and every turned cheek felt like a small rejection, and how those rejections built up over time until they formed a wall. I said, she talks about consent, but she never once asked for my consent to turn our marriage into a one-sided experiment. She didn't want a partner to agree with her. She wanted a subject to comply. I looked at Piper. You didn't build a boundary, Piper. You built a cage. For both of us. The only difference is, you were holding the key. I turned back to the therapist. I wasn't punishing her. I wasn't being manipulative. I was surviving. I withdrew because I was in constant pain. And eventually, the only way to stop the pain was to stop feeling anything at all. The man she says she wants back, the one who was warm and affectionate, she systematically dismantled him, piece by piece, with her rules and her lectures. You can't break something and then get angry when it doesn't work anymore. My feelings aren't gone because I'm angry. They're gone because they were neglected. They died. And I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done. There's nothing left to fix. The room was silent when I finished. Piper was staring at me, her mouth slightly open. It was as if she was hearing my side of the story for the very first time. The therapist looked from me to Piper, and then she said something very simple. "Piper, it sounds like in your effort to feel respected, you made your husband feel completely objectified." That was it. That one sentence. The validation from a neutral, professional source. It was like a dam breaking. Piper just crumpled. All the theories, all the rhetoric, all the self-righteousness, it all just washed away, and she was left sitting there, looking small and lost. The confident, empowered woman who had walked in was gone. She just kept shaking her head and whispering, "I didn't know." We didn't say much more after that. The session was over. The drive home was even quieter than the drive there. I don't know what will happen with our marriage. Maybe we'll separate. Maybe we'll divorce. Honestly, right now, I don't really care. The outcome of the marriage is no longer the focus of my life. The focus is me. I'm still sleeping in the spare room. I'm still going to the gym. And I'm still in the garage. The motorcycle is almost finished. I rebuilt it from the frame up, every single piece cleaned, repaired, or replaced. It's beautiful. It's strong. It's mine. Sometimes Piper will stand at the door to the garage and just watch me. She doesn't say anything. She just watches. Maybe she's finally seeing me, the actual man, not the ideological construct she had in her head. Or maybe she's just looking at what she broke. It doesn't matter. I finished the last adjustment the other night, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. A perfect, steady hum. It's the sound of something broken being made whole again. And for the first time in a very long time, I feel at peace. I have a full tank of gas and an open road ahead of me. And for the first time, it feels like I'm the one in the driver's seat of my own life.